Hello YouTube and welcome to another Elder Scrolls lore video. Today we're talking about the story of the Forgotten Crypts, an interesting quest in the Elder Scrolls Online and a story that I felt like it deserved covering. So, without any further ado, let's immediately talk about the Forgotten Crypts. Back in the year 582 of the Second Era, the Leodos plague was raging through the Dajan region of Morrowind. Especially the cities were suffering under the infections and many refugees fled the urban areas of the province. Among these refugees was a group of Dunmer under the leadership of a man named Danus. This group fled the city of Narcissus hoping to avoid the many infections going on there. They travelled all the way to the east of the Dajan region and hid themselves in an old crypt that was basically forgotten in the hills after driving off the skooma dealers who had holed themselves up inside. They then established a camp in the main part of the ancient crypt and barricaded all the entrances against the many dangers of the deeper parts of the crypts, where still many reanimated undead were creeping around every corner, and several skooma dealers were actually still trapped inside. Once they were inside, they survived for a little while, but after a few days the group of refugees was attacked by bandits, and they managed to drive off the bandits, but unfortunately this attack had resulted in a member of the group named Sella to be separated from the others outside the camp. How exactly this happened we don't know. But when she found her way back to the camp, she was denied entrance by the other refugees as they feared that she carried the plague, and thus she was locked out. And this is how you meet her in your playthrough, locked out by her fellow refugees. And when you meet her, she tells you that she's been locked outside of the camp, but yet her husband is still inside and that she knows a way around the barricade. Unfortunately, in order to go that route, you need to face many dangers and undead that are still in the crypts, and since she isn't very adept at combat, she asks you to protect her along the way. You agree, and on your way you find out that before the skooma dealers occupied the crypt, it had actually been occupied by a necromancer named Nicholas Duar, who had raised all the dead in the crypt, thus explaining the undead activity in the crypt. In his journal, Nicholas says that he will stay at the tomb and occupy it for his own schemes. We don't know what happened to Nicholas, because while his experiment was clearly a success, there's a lot of undead in this crypt, he and his body are basically nowhere to be found, indicating that either he might still be alive and somewhere in the world, but we can't find him anywhere in the game. So it might just be that this journal that we find of him is actually really old, and that he and his experiment might have been going on in the crypt hundreds of years ago, now long forgotten, but his schemes still linger and the effect of his spell can still be found, as obviously there are still a lot of undead and ghosts in the crypt. After fighting your way through all the threats of the crypt, you reach the refugee camp, where you are, after some convincing, or threatening, you are let in by the doorkeeper, and once you're inside, you find that Sella's husband Garrel is nowhere to be found in the camp. You ask one of the camp residents where he is, and she tells you that Garrel got lost during one of the hunting expeditions into the deeper parts of the crypt. When you investigate these hunting expeditions by asking her how the refugees are able to hunt in the crypts where there are only dead things, she tells you that the people of the camp don't really question it and are simply happy that food is on the table at all. This is obviously getting quite sinister, and I think you can see where this is going. So you decide to approach the leader of the camp, who was as well the chief hunter, Danus, who is eating at some really tasty looking meat. He tells you that during one of the hunting expeditions it became apparent that Garrel was infected with the plague, and thus they banished him from the camp and abandoned him in the crypts. Sella then tells you that she is very worried about him and asks you to please look for her husband in the crypts. She says that she will stay and question the refugees, but since you feel like something is fishy in the camp, you can also tell her to quickly go outside as the crypts aren't safe. When you explore the remainder of the dungeon, you initially find no trace of Garrel, but in the final room of the crypt, far away from the refugee camp, you find a Garrel who has completely lost his mind to the plague. After all, it turns out that Danus wasn't lying, and that Garrel did indeed get infected with the plague, and you are unfortunately forced to put him down. However, if you keep looking in the chamber that you found him in, you will find a last letter that he wrote to his beloved before going insane. In the letter he reveals to Sella that he found out that the meat they have been eating was that of the skooma dealers still locked in the crypt, and that they killed them and then ate them. He wanted to reveal that to the people of the group, however he got quickly accused by Danus of being infected with the plague and then got locked up in the room that you find him in. It turns out that he was indeed infected, but Garrel himself sees it as a way to keep him silent. When you return to the camp, you confront Dennis about it, and you can either choose to let him and his people be and just eat the meat, or put it all to an end by burning their meat supply, which is obviously coming from dead Dunmer. When you enter the kitchen, you can even see their skeletons, so I wonder how nobody else has questioned all of this. Now you can convince Dennis to basically leave the crypt with his people, but he says that his people can leave, but that he will stay after you burn his meat supply, and that he'd rather starve than get out, because the crypt has become his home. Which really makes me think that he's probably already wanted for other things if you're willing to die in a crypt, but, you know, we don't learn anything about that, unfortunately. After confronting Danis, you can then meet Sella outside of the crypt and inform her of her former husband's fate, and finish the quest. Or, if you did not tell her to wait outside and you let her stay in the crypt, you can find out that she's been eaten by the people of the group. Fun, right? Now, that's the end of the story of the refugees, but the story itself isn't quite the thing that fascinated me so much about this quest. Other than the questionable meat source, the thing that really fascinated me the most was the fact that this forgotten crypt somewhere in the hills of Morrowind has been documented to be used by a necromancer, then years later skooma dealers, then refugees, and who knows what in the future. I don't know why it's so fascinating to me, but details like that really make the world feel alive and sort of lived in, knowing that even though the occupants, or even the original builders, the people who built the crypt, are no longer there and probably already forgot about it, the story of the crypt itself doesn't end, and if we ever get another Elder Scrolls game in mainland Morrowind, we might just find out that this same crypt has been used by someone else yet again, or maybe someone else in between that. I don't know why, it just really fascinates me, and we have multiple instances of this happening in the Elder Scrolls universe, but I don't know, maybe because of the questionable meat source this one really stuck out to me. Anyway, I thought that it deserved a mention. So, that said, this is the end of the video, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, I hope you will consider returning for the next Elder Scrolls lore video. And before I end things, allow me to thank my top patrons, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, and Mr. Christmas. These wonderful people, along with all the others on screen, keep this channel afloat, and for that I am very grateful. That said, I will see you next time. Bye bye.